Thank you all for having us here again. As you mentioned, my name is Annie Hindenlang. This is Phil Abramson. We prepared this redevelopment plan. That's been about 2 years from start to finish of what our involvement has been, largely driven by public outreach. I'm sure many of the people here and you all have heard a bit of what I'm going to be sharing with you today, but we want to make sure that we cover the entire, scope of what we did and how we got here, because it's been really important to keep people informed and be transparent throughout this entire process. And I think more than any other client we've had, you all have been successful at doing that. Next slide. Quickly, I'm going to give you some background, then do a plan overview, and then go into what are potential next steps. This is a big plan. It covers a lot of stuff. I will try to be as concise as possible. Maybe you'll have to remind me to slow down. But there's a lot here.
I will do that.
I always think you're telling me to be quiet, and so I start whispering.
No, it's not quiet. Just
I know. I'm always like, oh, okay. Okay, so I'll try to slow down. But it's a lot to cover, and I'm very excited about it, and I'll try to be as make the excitement contagious. Go ahead. So just to give you some context, the redevelopment area is pretty strategically located within the larger Summit area. It's next to the downtown and within walking distance of the train station. This is the area that was studied, that we were requested to study by the council and the planning board, and we did a preliminary investigation on. It includes the firehouse, the library, the YMCA, the post office, several parcels behind the firehouse and City Hall. We did not include the senior housing facility because we didn't think that should be included, and we should also note that, can you go to the next slide? Yeah, that in 2012 and 2014, the post office and the parking lot behind it was declared an area in need of redevelopment. We did look at it and recertify to make sure everything was, still consistent there, but that was a previous designation. So really, you all have been going through this process for quite a while. This is, again, another step in your master plan revisioning and everything. But we really got involved in this in late 2017, once for developing the redevelopment plan, once you all designated as an area in need of redevelopment. Over in 2018, in the spring and summer, we held many public outreach meetings. We had surveys. We had stakeholder meetings. We met with the property owners within the area. We met with the property owners surrounding the area and did a lot of online outreach to try to cover as many people as we could. In fall of 2018, we used all that public information that we got and all the direction from the public in terms of what they wanted to see, and did some market research to kind of compare those two and see where realities were, where some challenges might be, and developed a policy development from there. Throughout the winter, we've been drafting this plan, which you all now have and which is available on the city's website. And we also got some additional feedback once we had some of the understanding of what the market was thinking. And that was additional feedback from property owners within the site. We had another meeting with the seniors. We had another meeting with the public in general, just to kind of update them what the market said. And so here we are today, in April, trying to present this plan to you that you can consider. This is the first reading. You typically, you're not required to have a presentation, but we figure more information is better than not. After this, we'll be going to the planning board for a master plan consistency review, and then of course come back here for a public hearing. So this is the first step in that process. So to give you a general idea of the things that we focused on throughout the entire redevelopment plan, it's derived from an extensive public outreach process. As you can see, we've had a really great time. We even went to the high school, which is still my favorite, but we worked with the Downtown Inc. So it's been a really great process. So it's very much driven by what the public wants to see. We emphasized context-sensitive design that kind of bridges the gap between the existing downtown and where there's kind of a lack of development and the residential just beyond the redevelopment area. The Historic Preservation Commission was actually really helpful in giving us some feedback on how to do that with design. We kind of focused on doing that with scale and program and development and making sure that was appropriate. In reality, it proposes a kind of a small new neighborhood that is going to be designed to support the existing downtown and create new opportunities for the city and revenue sources that they wouldn't have had otherwise, and that's kind of what you'll see when we get into each of the pieces. It's very sensitive to infrastructure and traffic limitations. We know parking concerns exist. That came up a lot. We know that there's traffic congestion. We know that there's pedestrian safety issues. So that is one of the things we focused on throughout everything and any requirement in the plan. The Environmental Commission helped a lot with some guidance on sustainability. And when I say modern standards for construction, it's just, what kind of space is a retail user looking for today? What kind of space is what is like modern day office space? I don't mean modern architecture. So it was really focusing on what's the next step of development and not just where we are now, where is everything headed, including things like accounting for Uber and dropping off cars. And lastly, and the biggest thing, and my favorite part, is we wanted to create spaces and places for people to enjoy Summit, people of all ages, people that want to enjoy it all times of the day, whether they're, the seniors walking around. Some of them like to go to 7-Eleven a lot or walking to the bus stop, or if it's students after school, we want to make something that's very inclusive. And this is just a reminder of the block and lots that's included. It's a little over 10 acres, but most of it is owned by public property, which is another reason you're not getting a lot of revenues currently. But this is just kind of a list of the buildings that I kind of already included that are within the redevelopment area. And because this is a larger area and it's not just one parcel and there's a lot going on here and there's some complex things that we were trying to understand, we wanted to look at the area from 4 different districts and kind of create a vision for each of those districts that's appropriate either from scale, uses, different types of public spaces that they need to have, different parking requirements. So we broke them down into these different sub-districts. They don't necessarily entail a phasing or a priority. It just kind of gives a clear vision for each of these areas. The first sub-district is the post office and the parking lot behind it. The second one is the YMCA, the parking lot, and the library. The third phase is the firehouse and St. Teresa's and the funeral home and everything that's there. And then the fourth phase is City Hall, the parking lot, and then the several commercial developments along Broad Street. So I'm going to try to slow down a little bit here, but we wanted to give, first of all, a good idea of the kind of uses that we proposed for this area. They're based off of public feedback. They are based off of our understanding of what the market seems to think is feasible. For example, a large, big box grocery store, maybe not something you're looking for, but also something that the market didn't think was appropriate, so we wouldn't include it here. In general, we tried to keep this very commercial oriented. It's an important transition between the existing downtown, where there's offices and a lot of daily activity, into what will become a new residential node, a neighborhood that needs to feel that way as well and be designed and protected to do so. We wanted to continue the civic uses, so we have things like a museum as an option, as an extension of the civic uses you see along Maple Street. And so it's kind of focused more being more downtown oriented. We think this is a perfect location for a flagship, a great, gorgeous office building that's appropriately scaled and designed. And it's also a great opportunity near the green. Right now, the minimum public open space is 3,000 square feet, which means that no matter what gets built there, at least 3,000 square feet is going to be set aside for public space. We put in pretty strict guidelines in terms of what that public space should look like. Throughout the outreach process, we asked people on different types that they wanted to see, what was missing. Here, hardscaped spaces were across the board. Any demographic was looking for some hardscape opportunities where they could, I don't know if it was a skateboard, but that's one piece, but also just sit and relax or have a yoga class and not mess up grass. So this is one of the areas that we targeted for that kind of harder, tougher landscape area that could also be used throughout the day for commercial users. Minimum retail space is 2,500. That's to make sure that the street's activated and continues the commercial space and activity from the existing downtown to this area. And right now it has a maximum height of 4 stories. This area we were a little more sensitive to and wanted to be really careful in terms of architecture and open space and uses. It is next to the historic beautiful green. It does have 2 really great civic users, and we wanted to make sure that whatever came in there complemented that and didn't in any way negatively impact it. We wanted to also see an expansion of that community activity and make sure that there's a reasonable amount of open space to kind of reflect the large setbacks that are already there and complement and extend the effect that the green has on the area as a whole. Again, here you'll see a lot more community uses. Unlike phase 1, we don't have residential in phase 1. We do allow residential here, but it's a lower density, lower number of units, and we think that it's a great opportunity for someone to be able to live and walk right over to the train station or look over the green. But lower density than the other areas that allow residential, 30 units per acre, which that's a pretty typical urban suburban number. Minimum public open space is larger here, again, like I said, to make sure you continue that open feel and that public space from the green into the development. And the maximum height is 3 stories, so a little bit lower here to be contextually sensitive to the buildings around it. And we have commercial uses, but they're more limited here, again, to kind of protect the users that are already using the library and the YMCA. This Subdistrict 3, as I mentioned, is where the firehouse is and the surrounding properties to the south. This is where we thought you had the most opportunity to kind of be creative, create something that maybe doesn't already exist in Summit. It has some better layouts in terms of potential to hold bigger users, like a small grocery store or even a small theater. We think that because there's a little bit of a buffer from the historic downtown buildings and from the green and the kind of lower scale there, it's another opportunity to have a little more height, and especially definitely work in some residents that can either walk to the downtown and have jobs there already, go into the first district, or go to the YMCA. Like, it's a perfect location to create that community node. And because of that, it does have the largest requirement for open space, the 6,500. Because to make that space work and to make a little bit more of a scale work there and to have all these different uses and provide some new opportunities, you need to have a great space that people want to spend time in, and I'll show you some images later, but we really focused on the experience people would have there and how that would be a space that was more green and more flexible, and could be programmed throughout the year. And maybe the Y could use it for classes, maybe the library could use it, but it's an opportunity for everything around it to come together. This does have more uses. It does have more of a nightlife component in terms of that it allows a brewery or a brew pub, so some of those uses that would make this a 24/7 kind of neighborhood opportunity. Not necessarily 24/7, but at least maybe till like 10 p.m. Again, it has more commercial opportunities. We wanted to be really creative here. For example, there's like a demonstration kitchen here that's become a pretty popular thing around renters and downsizers, where they can hold events themselves. They can go and cook and have people over, or they have chefs come in and teach you. And I think there's someone, she's probably in here, but there's someone who actually does that here now, and she was like, I'd love that, like I'll move there. Again, a little bit higher density because it contextually and scale-wise can handle it and hold it. More open space, more of a minimum requirement for retail because that's going to be important to keep people moving around, and a little bit higher than the other districts at 4 stories. This is the last phase, the 4th district. This is, again, we were trying to make sure to complement the fact that it's next to City Hall, that it's in between City Hall and senior housing, so we're not trying to push brewery or brew pub or anything like that here, being considerate of that. It does have an open space requirement, but not as large as the other areas because these are kind of odd-shaped parcels that might be hard to accommodate larger open space. Because of that odd shape, we did give it a little bit more density so that it's able to provide some of the public give-backs we'll get into later, afford those, and also build up for that. So it has a slightly higher density, but again, something very appropriate for Summit at 40 units per acre. Some retail space, but a lower height of 3 stories. In terms of architectural design, like I said, the Historic Preservation Commission really came in and gave us some good ideas on how to speak about this appropriately, and they were great to talk to in terms of getting some understanding of how they operate. But these images that we put in the plan were directly from the public outreach that people voted on and liked the most, so we put them in the plan, and we clearly say this is inspiration. This is not what's supposed to be built here. When you come and propose, you will have projects, and they will be publicly vetted, and they will be considered before anything's adopted or executed or moved forward. But it's just to inspire them, to show them the kind of quality and aesthetic that was popular here. But we do have a lot of, I'd say generic, but often not included architectural design standards, like regulating height and having guidance on making really good door and window placement, and having glazing, and regulating the building materials so that they're high quality, which I know is important to the HPC. The open space and plaza design, we wanted to make sure that each district had its own identity for what it's trying to achieve in terms of open space, so that you don't just have a bunch of plazas with kind of bistro sets up, but they're really intentionally designed. The minimum area requirements reflect that, so that, you know, different programming's possible. The high quality public spaces in terms of year-round landscaping that's year-round attractive, that's sustainable, that's flexible, but also, you know, kind of directs people into how to enjoy that space and how to use that space, and a lot of direction on how the layout should work within the overall development in terms of how it should interact with the first floor and how it should move pedestrian activity and attract pedestrian activity. Speaking of pedestrian activity, one of the great opportunities here is Railroad Avenue, as well as a potential connection between the YMCA and the library for a really beautiful, fun, attractive pedestrian experience. These are some examples that we have in the plan itself, but beyond creating some new opportunities that are more pedestrian focused and less car oriented, we also looked a lot at safety. That is a concern, especially given the middle schoolers that come through the area. The seniors expressed some concerns about walking around the area. So we have some really strict guidelines for how the crosswalks need to be designed, and where safety kind of safety investigations and studies need to be done in order to improve it in the areas that were highlighted as dangerous. Oh, go back, sorry. And another thing that came up several times, and it's a very, it's a new idea for, I guess, for this country, but a WUNRF is brought up, a WUNRF design, and you can see one on the bottom left there. But it is something that's very popular in Europe. It's where cars can still use the space, but it's very much designed to make them aware of where they are and that this is a pedestrian-oriented area and to be careful. And the way that you design the curbing, the way the materials used and everything, it visually makes the pedestrians more important to everyone around, and they have more of a precedence there. And this came up several times from people in the public, not necessarily WUNRF, but a nice street that could be closed down for events or something like that. And from the market in terms of, they were looking at Cedar Street as a possible option for a really nice pedestrian plaza space. So area-wide, there's a lot of higher environmental requirements and sustainability requirements. We had a lot of good conversations with the Environmental Commission. They gave us some examples and standards they have. We wanted to make sure that every building's solar ready. We have provisions for green roofs, alternative transportation allowances and encouragement, for example, like using bikes and using car sharing, as opportunities to offset some costs. And throughout the entire site, we've required 100% stormwater recapture, which I think is feasible and is a really honorable goal to have in an area that has a lot of impervious surface right now. But the landscaping is, native species. It's supposed to be very, sustainability is not even, it's cool now for the market, but it's also important for what you all are trying to do here. And a lot of the things that the Environmental Commission mentioned, we tried to work into here. The auto parking standards, we know that parking is a issue in Summit. We know that it is, at high demand, and it's something that we had to be very careful with. Whereas in other areas, in other kind of transit-oriented areas, we've maybe used 1-to-1 or 1.2. We wanted to be especially careful here for residential requirements, so we have a little higher than traditional at 1.4. In general, the market kind of also agreed with this, that we spoke with. Some of them even wanted higher ones, but we think this should be able to capture the market that's here right now and some of the great things you're already doing with managing parking. Most commercial spaces and all the other uses have 3 spaces per 1,000, which again is pretty standard. There's 100% replacement of any existing parking, so there will not be a loss of parking. And then we also included bicycles parking standards, both indoor and outdoor, because that's going to be an important part for kind of bridging that last little gap for either people coming to the downtown or people going commuting from their home, have a nice place to leave your bike, and then hop on the train for work. Circulation and loading. We wanted to make sure that this is another good example of a WUNRF, if you're curious, on the right, where you can kind of see that there's cars allowed there, but it's definitely got a different feel than the traditional giant black strip of asphalt. But we wanted to make sure to find ways to improve the existing circulation We know that there's traffic congestion. Those things will have to be studied and considered. Phil wrote an excellent, probably the highest standard I've ever seen in terms of a traffic impact study prior to any development being considered or approved. I mean, they have to do some significant modeling, and we even laid out the catchment areas for that and made it very specific so that it's clear that this is a concern and it needs to be addressed and dealt with publicly. We wanted to make some flexible loading and unloading standards. There are requirements there, but we also don't want to, kill this area. Like if that entire street was, partially loading areas, it wouldn't be as attractive or pedestrian friendly. And throughout the plan, we have traffic calming measures, which I know the police chief knows very well. But yeah, so in general, we're just trying to improve the quality of life here. So the heights and the densities and everything I gave you before, we were trying to, I know this is really tiny, I apologize, I didn't realize it was going to come out this tiny, but we wanted to find a way to incorporate the things that the public wanted to see and make it very clear how they were going to be included and how they would be considered, and also give the council an ability to negotiate things in exchange for getting the public benefits that we heard over the entire process. And to kind of give you an idea of what that means for Subdistrict 1, which again was the post office and the parking lot behind it, some of the things we heard that people really wanted to see were additional parking for senior housing facilities. So this means replacing what's there plus giving them more. I know that we've heard a lot about the struggles they're having there. Additional public parking and or gateway and pedestrian enhancements at Railroad Avenue and Maple Street. So that's redoing all of Railroad Avenue to be this beautiful pedestrian connection and creating a beautiful gateway to connect people to the downtown and to the sub-district. And if a developer provides those things in exchange, they can get an additional floor or height to kind of offset the cost of those public improvements. And we just wanted to spell this out. I don't want to go through each of them, but I can tell you a lot of it's related to public parking. The library was looking to see a second entrance if possible that would allow them to use the building after hours. And that's Subdistrict 2. And Subdistrict 3, the improvements we talked about on Cedar Street, the inclusion of a marketplace. A lot of the public wants to see a small grocer here. And in Subdistrict 4, again, additional public parking, Chestnut Avenue enhancements, and Springfield and Railroad Gateway enhancements. So the plan has basic improvements they have to make to Broad Street and Maple Street and Morris Street. But all of these take it one step further, and that's pretty much clearly outlined in the plan so that the public and the developers know the expectations here and the opportunities to get a little bit more height or density. So that's it. In terms of possible next steps, as I mentioned, this would be the introduction of the ordinance for the redevelopment plan. The redevelopment plan itself becomes the zoning for the area, the guiding document for this area. It goes through a planning board master plan consistency review, then comes back to you all for a second reading and a public hearing. After that, we've had a lot of questions about what is this going to look like how many units, is there, what kind of revenues. All that stuff gets worked out after this, and that goes through a negotiation process that includes the public and the council and the private market. And after a plan is adopted, you can begin those discussions. And at that time, that's when you do that very particular public vetting of the style of the building, and the performer that tells you the financial analysis of the project and all those things, to vet and create a project that will ultimately, in very, very detailed language and a very thick document, be turned into a redevelopment agreement that spells out exactly what the developer has to do to meet the things that you all agreed upon over the summer and fall potentially. That's it.
Thank you very much, Annie. Does Phil, Michael, do you want to add anything to the presentation? Or are we?
No, I appreciate everybody's time this evening. I know you have probably a full agenda, so if there are any questions, we're happy to.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what we will do, because while this is not the public hearing per se, but since there are folks from the public here, and we always like to hear from the public as to what is going on as far as what people are thinking. What I'd like to do is just start off, if council members had any comments or questions, start off there. Otherwise, we will open it up to public folks in the audience who want to have questions or comments or things for us to think about want to hear from you guys, and then we'll wrap it up. I just wanted to point out one thing, because the maps show large areas being covered as different sub-districts, right? But the context of this and the way that we frame this is a non-condemnation redevelopment. That is, that we specifically said that private parties, if they want to participate, can do so, but we're not going to go there with eminent domain and take over a private party's property in order to do some kind of development because some developer wants to do that type of development, right? So while there's post office is there, the YMCA is there, the library is there, there's a bunch of private entities that are there. Every one of those parties can decide whether they want to opt in or stay out. And that's just not going to change between now and when, because there's enough land there that is purely owned by the city of Summit for us to do development projects. And it'll be almost, rather than looking at it as a green field where you have development, it's more like an infield of filling in different parcels that will exist. The other thing that the public should be aware of, and this has been on our agenda, one of the properties that is publicly owned, privately owned, did come on the market, and the city was able is involved in what we ultimately think will be a successful negotiation for the purchase of that property, which is the property at 7 Cedar Street. And you'll see somewhere further in our agenda where we'll be doing an ordinance for introduction about ultimately purchasing that property. But the reason that property is significant, and we've talked about this at council in the last couple of council meetings, is because it's strategically located within that sub-district 2, if you will. And if, for those of you who don't know, if you know where the YMCA is, the parking lot that's there right next to the Y, when you're facing into the Cedar Street behind the Y, away from the park, there's a little professional office building. It's about 2 stories high. It's got a large parking lot. It's adjacent to the fire station. It's contiguous with the fire station, so it makes a larger parcel available to us. The good thing from your perspective as residents and taxpayers in this town is that it is a fully occupied building, and that if for some reason this redevelopment did not happen, it will continue to pay private property taxes, and it brings revenue into the city. So either way, it's a win-win for us, but we were very fortunate that it came up the market when it did. I think that's the context that I want to give folks. I don't know if there's stuff that I've missed. The last thing I want to say is, obviously you're seeing a plan here. And I think the key component from Annie's conversation and presentation is what happens from now on is not only do we have this back and forth with the public, and the planning board has that same discussion, but ultimately this is what we would like to see. But we're not the developers, right? So developers will want to do what they want to do, and we will have to have a negotiated process with them to see what we, from that plan, can get or we want to see done. But this tells the market, this is what we would like, these are the parameters, this is what we think is acceptable, these are the uses we want in this area. It gives a sense of where we are. But this is not an uninformed plan. And the reason we say that it's not an uninformed plan is because prior to this, we already had a vetting process with developers who gave what was called a response to a request for qualifications. So we were able to see who were qualified developers, and I can honestly tell you they're major developers both in New Jersey as well as nationally who put in proposals. There were multiples of people who did, some of a consortium of them. And then subsequently, the next step we also took, we had them provide conceptual ideas, not necessarily plans about each specific site, but conceptual ideas of what they would plan on doing in this set of parcels. And so this plan that you're seeing here is pretty well informed with what the marketplace is telling us they are willing to consider. I hope if I've screwed anything up, somebody else on this dais will correct me. But with that, let me ask any other members of council or the mayor to comment. Mayor.
I just want to reiterate what you're saying. This is a framework, and it's an 80-page document with appendices, and it is on the website. So it's very clear. I've read it a couple of times, but being old-fashioned, I needed a paper copy. Certainly it gets through, and Andy just gave us a really great overview, but it gets into some of the details and explains things very clearly. So I would encourage you to read it if you're interested. And again, this is a framework. This sets up the parameters within which we can negotiate with developers and get input from the community. It's a starting place. And that's what you're talking about with the conceptual plans. That's the market research that you were talking about. So I'm excited about this.
Anyone else? Steve?
I just want to thank them. I mean,
Yeah.
you met with us a number of times privately, and this little recap did a fantastic job of what we had talked about. So thank you for everything you've done, and I have confidence that your outline is one that we can follow.
Thank you, Steve. Matt?
Thank you for the excellent presentation, and I'm so appreciative of all the people that came to all the meetings and gave so much input. It's really nice to have such an enthusiastic community. I have one specific question, maybe for you, City Solicitor Giacobbe, which is, I noticed brew pub and brewery listed a couple times in a couple of the sub-districts, and can we, with redevelopment, can we get more liquor licenses, or can we find another way to get a brew pub in there?
No. There's actually, there's different legislation right now that's being proposed for microbreweries, et cetera. There's legislation, if you have a hotel, they can have a limited liquor license, but the number of liquor licenses is based on population. It's disseminated by the Alcoholic Beverage Commission, which is a state agency. Most municipalities, you'd be surprised, actually have more liquor licenses than would be permitted. And many municipalities have what's known as pocket licenses. People own a license, but they don't operate it. And so when things like this go into existence, you'll see there'll be sales of pocket licenses. And there's two types of licenses. There's consumption licenses, which is like a brew pub. And then there's retail licenses, which would be more like a liquor store. But we don't have the ability. That's all done through the state agency, and it's all based on population and the need. They don't want to have a community oversaturated with liquor licenses. And and the market will drive the price. I've been in communities where, a liquor license will sell for $500,000-$600,000 for a consumption license.
Bill, do you want to add something?
Yeah, if I could just hop on with that. One of the great things about this redevelopment area in particular, not redevelopment areas generally speaking, but because there's so much public property here, and I think that Michael was one of the pioneers of this in Morristown, working on public properties, and when you transact that property, there are certain things that you can do in terms of the title to retain public control or ownership. That would allow a concessionaire's permit to be had. So this is the Xanadu complex in the Meadowlands. That's exclusively how all their liquor licenses are happening. Jockey Hollow in Morristown, that's exclusively how, and that was all done through the redevelopment process. So that does provide that opportunity. And the microbrew thing is relatively easy to get. In Chatham, the Twin Elephants, that's on a microbrew license on River Road, except you can't serve food. That's one of the rules, but they could produce a lot of beer under that license if so desired. Right. But this does open up opportunities, and particularly due to the current public ownership, is really the main opportunity for that.
Thank you, very clear, and thank you, City Administrator Rogers. We could open a hotel with one cot upstairs.
You got 100 rooms.
Oh.
They thought about it.
Beth?
Thank you, Council President. This has been a really informative process from the beginning, and I want to thank you guys for all the hard work, but I also want to thank all of you in the room and everyone else who's listening. I mean, I think you heard Annie say at the beginning of the presentation, this doesn't happen everywhere, that the community's this engaged and this involved in the process and cares this much. We've had so many people come to these open houses and meetings and give input, and people that are not usually always involved. But so many people in Summit from all walks of life and from all four corners of Summit have come out to be involved in that. And that's what's going to make this successful. And that's what's going to make this a great project moving forward from Summit that really addresses a lot of needs that we have in the communities, but also a lot of the things that we all want to see in our community going forward. So the reason that this is going to work is a lot of hard work from a lot of people that are working directly on this project, but also because of the involvement of all of you and your input and the time that you've taken to share with us what you want to see in this project.
Great, thanks. Anybody else? Okay. With that, I'd like to open it up for anybody from the public. Just come on up, state your name and where you live in Summit, and Pamela, come on up. And whatever comment, questions, great.
I'm Pamela Zave. That's Z as in zebra, A, V as in Victor, E. And I live at 89 Kent Place Boulevard. And I apologize for the naivety of this question. I haven't been involved in any of the planning stages up to now. But I am wondering whether this planning process has involved at any stage what I would call an existence proof. That is to say, for any of these districts, a sketch of a possible redevelopment that would meet all the requirements. And, of course, it's an existence proof because if there's no such sketch, then you can't meet these requirements. And I would say that the specific thing that concerns me and that causes me to ask this question is the reiteration of, well, we want to do all these things, but we need more parking in every district. And that's what worries me and makes me wonder about it. Thank you.
Sure. Annie, would you like to?
To get to the numbers that we get to, we use the public feedback, but then we use our own knowledge of kind of massing and how to calculate those different things. For each of these districts, we laid out a potential floor plate for commercial, for residential, as well as structured parking that it would wrap. Sorry, I'm looking. That it would wrap so that it can not only meet the parking requirements of whatever use is there, but also the additional parking we're looking at. So we tested those numbers to make sure that it was feasible, but also using the market numbers. For example, one of the respondents said that you need at least 4 stories for commercial use to be viable and provide additional public parking. So that was some of the guidelines that we used as well. So it has been laid out to make sure it's feasible, especially from just like standard floor plate understanding. So I don't know if that answers the question, but we did make sure that it could all fit and was buildable.
I think it does. Pam, you need to come back up. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand your answer. You're talking a lot about numbers, and numbers are different from a real plan.
But okay,
a drawing that you can see.
So
there are parking,
yeah.
16 parking spaces here.
So at this stage, right, so again, like I said, this is parameters of what could be built. When we get to a redevelopment agreement with developers who will actually build the site, and you guys can correct me if I'm getting any of this wrong, it's at that point in time that we will come back to the public and we will show you plans. This is what this will look like here. This is what this will look like over there. This is how many stories it is. Mm-hmm. This is how the wraparound will look or not look. This is what's doable. These are the uses. We're not at that stage. This tells you.
But we did conceptualize that.
Okay,
we did do that. Yeah. So I understand your question. I'm sorry I wasn't clear. We did take the numbers and put them on the ground into very simple boxes because we know like how wide a corridor of parking is, how much depth the commercial space will need, and so on. So we did take the numbers and put them into actual buildings. Like they don't have beautiful windows or anything, but we know that they'll fit.
Okay.
So yes, what you're saying, they have been put into 3D. Test fit. There you go.
Okay.
Sorry, I apologize.
But I just want to be clear, because I don't want people thinking this is exactly what will be built at any site, right? So we're still going to have to negotiate with developers. That's why I don't want people going, okay, it's going to be 3 stories here, and then this could be 4 stories there, and this is what's going to be, because we don't want to leave you guys with the misimpression that this has all been, whether it's test fitted or not, this is still at a parameter stage in my head, because unless we have a developer who's willing to sign on a bottom line, we don't have a building.
Yeah.
And Council President, that's exactly why we didn't show any of those visuals, because we didn't want anybody to misinterpret that that is the thing that's being proposed here. This is just like zoning. It's more like zoning than it is a concept plan.
Right,
And
okay.
if I can elaborate, just to explain, we weren't trying to lay out anything in particular, but for example, if you have 50,000 square feet and we say 25,000 has to be used for open space, and then you have to provide this much parking, we just want to make sure that, or are we just
Understood.
throwing out stupid numbers? We want to make sure they were informed.
Right, understood,
Yeah.
that you're not proposing
Yeah.
things here that are not doable, right? So these are all doable things. It's ultimately, though, we're going to have to negotiate what exactly is going to be built. Anybody else? Yes, please, come on up.
So my name is Vivian Hardy. I live at 1 Oak Knoll Road in Summit. I want to thank you for having these kind of meetings and making everything out in the open. It's very helpful to have it be that way. I have two concerns. I've lived in Summit for 51 years, which is getting to seem like a record. Anyway, so I've seen Summit develop over time. And I've also been on the library board for 10 years and was chairman of the library board back when we were redeveloping the building. And I don't go to library meetings. I have no connection with the library anymore, except in my heart. It's a very great concern to me in my heart. So I'm only concerned with redevelopment District 2. And I also have another interest, and that today I was at a book group where we had a historian there who talked about the history of New Jersey. And I think Summit needs to think about the history of Summit. And our library now is built where the Carnegie Library used to be. I, for one, would not have liked our putting a new library building there. I would have wanted to do something to keep the Carnegie Library and add on to it, because I think that having a sense of the past is just as important as getting to be modern in the future. The buildings that I looked at that you showed are all very modern looking. But I kind of think that area where the connection is, and then the library, and then the post office, and the YMCA and Central Church are, create that sense of community and village that we really don't have anyplace else. When we redevelop the medical group, it now looks like a kind of modern building. So I want to encourage you to think about preserving some of the history of the town. Let me go back to the library for just a minute. We have now, I think, one of the most excellent libraries going. If you're going to move the people out of the library, it's probably going to be a 2-year project. The kids that come in from the middle school, the seniors that go to educational programs, all of that's going to be turned upside down. Will we be able to reclaim how excellent the program is right now? The library is so much more than books. Books are very important. I had a little go-round with a librarian, not the librarian, with the mayor a few generations ago about whether or not we needed books in the library. Well, we do need books in the library, but it is so much more than just the books. It is, I think, the heartbeat of the community. I would hope that you will take very careful consideration about doing something that would disrupt what's going on in the library. So my hope would be that you also conserve the village feeling, a little bit of our history, and keep the town as a place where it's not too crowded when you come into it. I go on the train, I see what's happened in other towns, and they begin to feel creeping urbanization. And I think Summit will lose it if we get to be an urban community instead of a suburban community. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vivian. We're certainly going to be very, very mindful of the role that the library, the important role the library plays in our community. We've had multiple conversations with members of the library board, and we'll continue to do that. It's a very important part of our community. So, and nothing has been decided. So,
Yes, please come on.
My name is Richard Wheeless, and it's Wheeless. And I've lived in Summit for 42 years in 34 Kings Hill Court. And the only thing I want to say is, wow, what a beautiful comment you made, Vivian. And I agree with everything she just said. I couldn't say it any better. So I'm just concerned about the beauty of this development. And but Vivian said it perfectly, and wow, thank you very much, Vivian.
Thank you very much.
can I just point out one thing? You know, one of the reasons we're doing this, approaching this project as an area in need of redevelopment as opposed to an outright sale of public property to a developer, is that the city, because we're doing a redevelopment plan and then negotiating, having conversations with the public, we are able to, as a community, maintain some control over what is going in there as a whole plan, as a whole section, a whole area, rather than just a developer buying a piece of property and putting up whatever is possible within the zone area. I mean, some of the things that will be in here might be able to do more than that if you're just buying that property individually and doing your own thing. But it has to be looked at holistically, has to fit in with the community, it has to satisfy, you know, the vast majority of our community, of the public. So that's why we're going down this road, because it really allows us to maintain an element of control. By control, I don't mean common council control, but the control of the members of the community. So in terms of what we want. Is that accurate?
Yeah, you can even control the color of the building if you'd like. You have a lot of control.
Right.
And the other point I'd like to add is that, you know, Topology, us, we've had the Historic Preservation Committee as well as the Environmental Commission, which is somewhat atypical, I would say, than other communities that don't necessarily get those types of groups involved in this part of the process. They'll wait till, you know, they get public hearings and then at that point in time have folks speak up. But we wanted to have people not only have the public input through all that public participation, but behind also have some of these discussions with folks who are, you know, are involved in these respective volunteer committees, because those folks have knowledge, a great deal of knowledge. We're very fortunate in this community that we have a lot of great volunteers who in their professional lives have a lot of expertise that if we were to actually pay for, this community would be bankrupt, but are willing to volunteer their time and give their input through volunteering. And so therefore, I think we're very cognizant of the need to keep the character of Summit. We're not trying to change what Summit is. The reason we came to Summit is because we all like what Summit feels like. And I understand exactly, I think I understand what you're trying to say. There's a feel to a town. There's not only just a simple roadway and what the buildings, but there's an overall feel and a sense that you get that's based on scale, it's based upon design, it's based upon a look of what it is, so that when you get out of it and you walk around, you feel as if you're at home, right? And so we are not missing that, I think, or not mindful of that fact, that when we go through this, we need to make sure we're not losing something in order to gain something. Anyone else? Claire, please, come on.
Good evening. Claire Toth, T-O-T-H, 11 Sunset Drive. And though I'm speaking only for myself, I do sit on the boards of both the Historic Preservation Commission and Summit Downtown, Inc. So I've been involved in a lot of different ways on this. And this may be a question more for the city than for Topology. One thing that has struck me throughout this process is the community's desire for really usable, flexible, open space in an area that abuts the Village Green, which mostly sits there unused. And I wonder how specific, I haven't read all 224 pages of this plan. There's more than just the 80 in front. You know, how specific, how the redevelopment area might be better, might be connected to the Village Green, and how in turn the city might take advantage of the redevelopment to find more ways to use the open space that we do have, you know, while keeping it open.
Thank you, Claire. Oh, you
Yeah.
wanna- yeah.
And that was kind of reiterated with a lot of the public that we spoke with. I think there is a desire to keep a bit of that very natural, pristine, like quiet feeling of the green. Like that was brought up several times. But then there was also the tension for wanting to be able to use it more. That's one of the reasons I brought up that hardscaping that kept coming up over and over again. Because, you know, we see the green and we go out to the public outreach and we think they're going to want like this, you know, Garden of Eden kind of look. But instead they're like, we would like some tough surface and some chairs and things that we can actually kind of be rough with, because I guess people don't feel like they have those opportunities with the green. So that's, again, that's absolutely one of the things that we want to make sure is incorporated throughout the redevelopment area to support all the users that are within the redevelopment area, like the library and the YMCA that are looking for additional space. But as she mentioned, I'm sorry, Ms. Toth, I don't remember your first name, it's very important that this area ties to the green. And that is highlighted over and over again in terms of a requirement for a certain pedestrian buffer that, you know, visually ties to the green between the YMCA and the library, as well as gateway, public, when we say gateway enhancements, we mean like public art, really attractive landscaping around intersections, things like that that naturally pull people from the green into this area or from this redevelopment area into the green.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we, one of the other things, and I know because we've had so many meetings about this, is we want to make sure that this does not feel like an area that's just been plopped down, right? That you just, and that it's separate from the rest of the connectivity of the town. And so we have a downtown that's historic in nature, and it's a certain look and a feel for it. And so you have to feel as there's a connectivity between whether it's the green, the downtown, moving back and forth between different places, and not feel as if you're somehow, you know, in this different zone, and then everything else around it is not within that zone. Anybody else have any other questions, comments? Yes, please.
My name is Lisa Resnick, and I've lived in Summit for 10 years, now in Maplewood, but I have a business here, nonprofit, and when I read through the report earlier, I saw the word entertainment, and today I didn't see the word entertainment, I saw recreation when you showed your slides. So my interest is if there might be a movie theater, because there isn't one anymore, and I know the city of Summit, most people would like to have one.
Yeah.
So.
Yes, we didn't want to put every single use in, and that's probably, that was misleading that we didn't include that, but that is still a component of it. And while a traditional, you know, 12-screen movie theater is not really feasible and not really doing well in most downtowns where they still exist, we wanted to leave the opportunity for like a black box theater or a community theater that's a little smaller scale that you could have for community events, and that's where that falls under. And that came up over and over again from the public as something they'd like to see as an opportunity. So it's still in there. We'll make sure to add it back. I think we're just trying to be concise because there's, you know, a pretty long list.
100 pages.
Okay.
Thank you, Lisa. Anyone else? Yes, please, come on up.
Hi. My name is Mimi Allerton, Allerton. I live at 105 New England Avenue. My parents bought their house on Bellevue in 1967. So, and I'm also a real estate agent. And I'm concerned about architecture because I think that some of my favorite houses are being knocked down and have been. So I'm wondering about cohesiveness between these 4 different areas. I'm also concerned about affordability, because I think that the builders who are building are selling, like where the Infinity dealership was, they're like $1.2 million to $1.8 million. And so when I think about the millennials and I think about college debt, I just think, are we going to have areas where, because that's what they want to do, they want to walk to town in the train? If we're going to draw that, because the town has to grow and change, I understand that. But I also think we have to, like you said, it kills me that they tore down the Carnegie Library. So my thing has to do with affordability, architecture, and are there plans to make the different areas, like so that you don't have a builder doing this there and a builder doing this there,
Right.
and there's no cohesiveness.
Yeah, understood.
Yeah, thank you. I want to double check that. I'm really glad you brought up the affordable housing because I apologize that I didn't mention that. While there's a baseline requirement of 15-20% that for affordable housing, that's like the traditional affordable housing when people say that you might think of. One of the things that many of the council members brought up and the public was kind of exactly what you're talking about, the people that are millennials or, you're preaching to the choir about the stuff, college debt and everything. But so we also created a definition for workforce housing, which is policemen and firemen and teachers and believe it or not, in Summit, architects and engineers, so that they can also negotiate for that kind of in between middle class, like thoroughly middle class that's kind of priced out, either because they don't meet the affordability limits or the market limits. So they wanted to make sure that that was part of that. So we actually defined it in here, and they're going to make sure that that is part of it. So affordability at the lower end market rate, as well as kind of that workforce middle income. And like I mentioned, we refer to the HPC guidelines. They sent them to us in terms of how they review these projects. That's why it's so many pages, because we wanted to make sure to reference all the proper documents. But we talk very specifically about the need for things to be complementary and transitional, and refer to what that means in Summit through the HPC's own language. So that's definitely a concern. That's definitely something that we made sure to protect. But as the mayor mentioned, the great thing about this is, whereas if you just turn this over to the private market, you couldn't really control how that looks. Now the public will literally be able to see anything that's going to be built, vet it, make sure it's appropriate before it's approved.
Okay, thank you.
And just so those who are listening to the acronym HPC.
Sorry.
Yes.
Historic Preservation Commission.
Thank
Sorry.
you. Yep, okay. Yes, please, come on up. We would appreciate it. It's also better for for people who are watching at home.
They can't hear you if you don't
can't
speak
hear
into
you.
the microphone.
You can take your time, though. Don't rush.
No rush.
No, we're not going anywhere.
That's all right. Take your time.
Hi, I'm Noni Kirkland, Kirkland, and I've lived in Summit for 40 years. My children have gone to school here, and I love the community. And I'm glad to see that we are taking time to go slowly, because I've seen what's happened in other communities, and they've done a lot of fancy things, beautiful bump outs and all kinds of stuff like that. And they're finding that they are less use than they thought they would be. So I encourage you to go very slowly and have definite plan.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, it's been 2 years so far, so and we're only just adopting the plan, the framework.
Okay. Anyone else? Well, thank you, all of you guys, for all of your hard work.
Yes,
Really
thank
do-
you, thank you.
There's been a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes. To get to this point, it takes a lot of work to get to here. We still have a long road ahead of us, and we'll go on that road one step at a time. So thank you. What I'm going to suggest, we take a 2-minute break so folks who want to leave can leave. Otherwise, there's still public comments on things that are not on the agenda, so feel free to stay for that, and then we'll go through the rest of the agenda. Thanks, folks.